Welcome to the Untold Tales audio anthologies. Written by Dr. Jeffrey A. Robinson and narrated by Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. Mindgames, King's Pawn opening. Michael sat in an auditorium full of other students, waiting for the professors who would tell them about the clinical study that had been advertised on flyers in the student union. He studied those around him, but didn't recognize anyone. Neither did he see any other graduate students in the crowd. Only undergrads had come. Michael felt out of place. Participating in lab experiments conducted by university professors was something that upperclassmen simply did not do. But while he was completing his master's degree in chemical engineering, he had come because he needed the money that was offered for these clinical drug trials. After a few minutes, two professors entered the room through a side door and approached the podium at the front of the lecture hall. Signaling for attention, one of the teachers shouted,
"If I can have your attention, please. I can make this short."
Everyone turned to the front of the room and quieted down. When the noise settled down, the taller professor with glasses said,
"My name is Dr. Daniel Sorensen, and I'm the Dean of Neurology here at the Medical College. My colleague here is Dr. Eric Prentice, and he heads up the genetics lab. Since you're here, I'll assume you've come in response to the notices posted around campus, soliciting participants for a new research project, which begins in 1 week. Our study is designed to examine the physical, chemical, and genetic origins of schizophrenia. As part of the grant, we're seeking test subjects from the student population and will accept up to 6 dozen candidates. The grant pays a small stipend to the participants, but we need to conduct a medical history pre-screening of all applicants before the research begins. Only a small portion of those who apply will be accepted, so we're trying to get as many people to sign up as possible. As part of the study, everyone who is accepted will take part in the testing of an experimental drug and undergo observation for a 2 or 3 day period. The grant pays $150 for each day in the program."
A murmur of approval swept across the assembled students. Dr. Sorensen held up a stack of forms in one hand and waved them at the assembled crowd.
"If you're interested in earning some extra money, fill out one of these questionnaires and we'll contact you by the end of the week."
As he dropped the stack of forms on the desk in the front of the room, the mob rushed forward and surrounded the desk, scrambling for the forms. Michael waited for the frenzy to subside, leaving it to fate to see if he should apply or not. As the last of the crowd backed away, he saw that a few unclaimed applications remained. Hesitantly, Michael took one and scanned the questions. "With my medical background, they probably won't take me," he thought, "but I need the money." Taking a pen from his pocket, he took an empty seat in the front row and began filling out the questionnaire. Several days later, Michael lay on a hospital bed. He struggled, but was strapped down. The other hospital staff had told him this was required because, in very rare cases, some patients experienced mild seizures in response to the medications being administered. "I shouldn't have lied on the questionnaire," he thought. "Something bad is going to happen. I know it." One of the questions on the application for the clinical study had asked whether he had even experienced incidents of schizophrenia. Michael needed the money, so he had lied and said no. The truth, however, was that ever since he had been a young boy, Michael had taken a drug called nitroxyl because he had a condition known as Landau's syndrome. Without that medicine, Michael always heard voices, whispers that were too indistinct to understand. As a child, he had overheard his doctors tell his parents that, before nitroxyl was marketed, those with the disorder sometimes went insane. However, the medication worked quite well for him, and since he'd started taking it since the age of 10, the voices that had plagued him earlier had remained quiet. Dr. Daniel Sorensen and Dr. Eric Prentice stood at the other end of the room talking to one another. Listening, Michael could barely make out their words. Prentice held a clipboard and was reporting something to Sorensen.
So far, said Dr. Prentice, all the tests are proceeding as expected. Of the 80 subjects treated so far with prilazine, only 9 have manifested the side effects of schizophrenia. Those subjects report hearing voices, and some are exhibiting signs of dissociative stress. Most are quite distracted, and we've had to restrain several until the drug wears off. Good. Let's keep processing applicants until we have about a dozen for the first phase of the study. Have you conducted any of the post-test MRI scans yet? Asked Sorensen. Now that we can consistently trigger the condition, I want to look for patterns of brain activity that reveal the physiology of their brains. Well, said Prentice, flipping through the summaries, the 9 subjects who've experienced signs of chemically induced schizophrenia all show increased activity of the frontal lobe, similar to those suffering from a genetic defect called Landau syndrome. Landau syndrome? Asked Sorensen. That sounds familiar. It should, replied Dr. Prentice. It's a well-documented, albeit rare, genetic disorder with a strong predisposition for schizophrenia. It only occurs in about 1 of 10,000 people, and is one of the few known genetic causes of schizophrenia, where subjects constantly hear voices. It's been determined that they have a defective allele that naturally produces the very drug we are administering, prilazine. Oh, yes, I remember you providing me briefs on that genetic condition. Well, I'm the geneticist, you're the physiologist. Anyway, those 9 subjects all had normal brain scans before taking prilazine, but heightened forebrain activity afterwards. That's when they reported hearing voices and start experiencing distress. That's consistent with the earlier FDA trials of this drug, prilazine. The pharmaceutical company that developed it had hoped to market it as a memory-enhancing drug, but they had to remove it from consideration for market release when about 10% of patients reported signs of schizophrenia, specifically that of hearing voices. It's one of 3 drugs we are scheduled to use to test to see if we can chemically induce schizophrenia and examine the changes that occur in the brain when they do. Exactly, replied Dr. Sorensen. That might indicate that it is a specific genetic defect that causes Landau syndrome. That gene might naturally produce prilazine in the body, and thus induce the symptoms we've noted. Dr. Prentice said, Right, and the MRI scans have confirmed the chemical component that would definitively explain the genetic basis for some kinds of schizophrenia. Unfortunately, Daniel, we have a problem. Look at this. Dr. Sorensen took the printout Prentice offered and examined it. What's so special about this? It's just like all the other subjects responding to prilazine. The frontal lobe is atypically hyperactive. Right, but this MRI isn't from a subject after the prilazine treatments. This is the scan of a test subject before he took the drug. Sorensen re-examined the chart. But that would mean... Exactly, said Prentice. This subject already suffers from Landau syndrome, and the drug could significantly increase the severity of that condition. Prentice turned and looked over at Michael, who cringed at the doctor's glare. The student apparently lied about his medical background, and we've inadvertently admitted someone into the study who already suffers from the disorder. Dr. Sorensen handed the MRI printout back to Prentice and said, Well, it would be too risky to administer prilazine to him. God knows what the drug would do to him. Drop him from the study. Prentice shook his head. It's too late, Daniel. There was a delay processing the pre-test MRI reports, and I didn't get them until he'd already been administered prilazine. Since we had no cause to question the medical history he provided, he was given a full dose. He's already built up therapeutic levels of the neurotransmitter in his bloodstream, and it could potentially stimulate his frontal lobe even more than it has been already. Sighing angrily, Sorensen said, All right, where is he? We might as well conduct the post-treatment scans to see what effect the drug has on him. If he suffers permanent brain damage, though, it's his own fault. After all, he falsified his application. What's the subject's name? Reading the name from the MRI report, Prentice replied, Cole,
Michael Cole. Prentice pointed at the bed where Michael was restrained. Dr. Sorensen faced him and scowled. Michael closed his eyes and fought back against the barrage of voices that assaulted him. It was far worse than anything he'd ever experienced as a boy. "Oh my God," he thought. "What have I done?" Michael struggled as orderlies rolled him down a hallway to the scanning room, but the straps that restrained him were strong and secure. Doctors Sorensen and Prentice walked alongside him and spoke about him as if he weren't there. "If his frontal lobe was already hyperactive, what effect do you think the prilazine will have on him?" asked Prentice. "It's hard to say," said Sorensen. "A cascade effect could occur, and he could go experience seizures. Then again, if there's a corresponding increase in subdermal blood flow, he could even conceivably develop an aneurysm. When I get him in the scanner, you'd better get a nurse and get some sedatives and anti-clotting agents ready." There were other test subjects waiting for the examination, but Michael was hurried to the front of the line and taken directly into the magnetic resonance imaging chamber. A technician covered his eyes with an opaque cloth. Michael called out, "Wait, why are you doing that? I can't see." Dr. Sorensen patted him on the shoulder and said, "It's all right, Michael. We do that to prevent stimulation of the optic nerves to avoid transient activation of the occipital lobes. Just relax and try to stay motionless. The MRI will only take about 6 minutes." Michael tried to obey and fought briefly against the deluge of voices that threatened to overwhelm him. Then he gave up and succumbed to the wave of noise. To his surprise, the din gradually abated, and the myriad of whispers vanished. Instead, he heard people around him in the room talking in normal tones. Maybe the prilazine is finally taking effect, he thought, and sighed in relief. Gee, this stuff is almost as good as natroxyl. All the whispering has stopped. Indeed, the only voices he heard now were those of nearby nurses and doctors. He relaxed and let his arms and legs go limp until he felt like he was floating. The straps on the gurney didn't seem nearly as tight as when he had been all tensed up. On the other side of the room, Dr. Sorensen was muttering softly to himself. "Damn, I hope this kid doesn't die on me. All I need is a lawsuit on my hands. This grant was hard enough to get, and I don't need any of these kinds of complications. I suppose I'd better start documenting everything that's happened in case he does have seizures, convulsions, or a stroke." "It's all right, Dr. Sorensen. I won't sue you. I just needed the money, and I thought I could make a little by participating in this study." "What did you say?" asked Sorensen. "I said I wasn't going to sue you. I realize I shouldn't have lied about my medical condition. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." "Whoever said anything about suing?" "You did," Michael answered. "You were just talking about it." "No, I wasn't," replied the doctor. "I've been here alone and wasn't saying anything." Michael listened to all the other voices. "That's ridiculous. I can hear everyone else in the room." "Michael, there's no one here but you and me." "But they're right here. I can hear them all." "I assure you we're alone in here." He paused and then added, "He's hallucinating." "No, I'm not hallucinating. I can hear you as clear as a bell." "I didn't say you were, Michael." "Yes, you did. Stop playing mind games with me. I tell you I'm perfectly all right and I'm not going to sue." "This is incredible," said Sorensen clearly. "This can't be happening." Michael heard the doctor walk over to the gurney and say, "Michael, can you hear me now?" "Yes, you're standing right next to me. I'm not deaf." The cloth covering Michael's eyes was pulled off, and he blinked up at Dr. Sorensen's face. While still beneath the MRI scanner and still strapped down, he looked up at the doctor, who had a troubled look on his face. "I believe you, Michael," said Sorensen. "As unusual as it seems, I really do believe you can hear me." "So what's so unusual about that?" said Michael, as he focused on the doctor's face. Because I'm not saying anything out loud, Michael. I'm only thinking words to myself. Yet, somehow, you're hearing me. Michael gasped. The doctor's words were as clear as if he were talking aloud, but his lips weren't moving at all. It was only then that Michael realized he wasn't hearing the doctor with his ears. If I'm right, Michael, thought the doctor silently, his face as unmoving as stone, I think you're hearing me telepathically. 3 months later, Michael stood in front of the nearest inductees to Project Mindguard. Dr. Drew Ferguson, an Army Lieutenant Colonel, addressed the assembled recruits. Dr. Sorensen and Prentice stood to his side.
I'd like to welcome all of you to this new facility. Your work here is vital to national security, and you will spearhead the development of a new type of military unit. All of you have been tested and selected to be in this new organization. All of you now know that with the daily doses of prilazine, you have gained remarkable new abilities. You are now all telepaths, and together you comprise a group the likes of which never have existed before. I won't lie to you, said Ferguson. He chuckled and added, I guess I couldn't, even if I tried. A ripple of laughter swept across the 50 young men. As telepaths, they could read the doctor's mind and those of every other person in the room. Your existence in this unit is a secret with the highest level of clearance possible. We are going to learn and develop your new capabilities together. He continued, first gesturing to Dr. Sorensen and Prentice, and then the other officers and non-coms assembled at the front of the room. My staff here will assist you and guide you, but frankly, we don't know what your ultimate capabilities might be. We are both excited and apprehensive, but we are all in this together, and I have high expectations for all of you. Turning and nodding to Dr. Sorensen, the lieutenant colonel said, Now Dr. Sorensen has a few words to say. Michael was considered one of the staff now. He had completed his master's degree and had been involved in developing the manufacturing process to mass-produce prilazine, now renamed as TP1. While the platoon of new soldiers had only been together for a week, the new telepaths were almost like family. After all, they had all grown up sharing the stigma of the same genetic disorder, Landau syndrome. All of them had grown up believing they had an incurable, albeit treatable, form of brain damage. When they discovered their malady was really a latent genetic trait for telepathy that was activated by the new drug TP1, their lives were transformed. They had been identified by a nationwide search of medical records and selected from people who had been diagnosed with Landau syndrome. However, only men between the ages of 18 to 30 were conscripted to join this new military group. It was something of a turnabout. All their lives, they had to take their medication, or they would suffer from constant whispers of voices just at the threshold of their perception. How could any of them have known that they were really hearing other people's thoughts and internalizing them as their own? Dr. Sorensen spoke. Gentlemen, I have met with each of you individually and was part of the team that screened and selected you to join our new organization here. As you have been told in earlier briefings, you are here because you have been found to possess remarkable abilities because of rare genetic traits that each of you possess. In fact, each of you have 2 rare genetic features that have enabled your newfound abilities. First, there is a gene which naturally produces a neurotransmitter that is identical to the drug each of you has been given. This gene is uncommon and only occurs in 1 in 1,000 people, and it is this special gene that has made you latent telepaths. With a daily regimen of TP1, each of you can become full telepaths, and together we are going to learn what this means and what your individual and collective capabilities really are. However, not everyone with that special gene can become a telepath. That is because 90% of all people possess a second gene that produces a chemical inhibitor. another neurotransmitter that cancels the effects of prilosine, thus turning off all potential telepathic abilities even in the few humans who had the recessive gene that produced it. You are all familiar with that drug. Each of you has taken that medication for most of your lives to turn off your latent telepathic abilities. That drug was natroxyl, and you will never have to take it again. It was eerie as Michael listened to a silent cheer emanate from assembled new telepaths. Glancing around, he noted that none of the normal soldiers or staff were aware of that soundless shout. Dr. Sorensen continued. Only those individuals who have the first gene and lack the second can actually manifest the potential for telepathy. Those are the individuals who have what has been known as Landau syndrome. They are rare. Only 1 in 10,000 people are diagnosed with that condition. Only 1 in 10,000 possess that combination of genes. However, with only one recessive telepathic gene, even those rare individuals still do not produce enough prilosine to reach the threshold of awareness necessary to develop their latent abilities. As a result, all of you could only hear the whispers of other people's thoughts. The medication that you have, and will continue to receive, will increase the therapeutic levels of the prilosine, TP1, in your systems, so that you can all become full telepaths. As Dr. Ferguson explained, we will have to work together to experiment and discover what your true capabilities are. Thank you for volunteering for this program. Welcome to the U.S. Army, and welcome to Project MindGuard. This time, the cheer that sounded from the new recruits was audible, though it was far louder on the telepathic level. The assembled troops were subsequently dismissed, and each of them returned to their assigned quarters. Michael wondered what might happen. This was, after all, an experiment, unlike any other in history. At this point, it was impossible to conjecture whether the experiment would lead to good or ill. As everyone returned to their quarters, the telepaths looked askance at one another, silently sharing the same concerns. The facility was awash with soundless whispers that echoed a myriad of conflicting emotions: excitement, wonder, apprehension, and worry. No words were spoken, but then, none had to be. Thank you for listening. We love our listeners, fans, and patrons. If you loved what you heard, please like and subscribe to our audio anthology, and consider visiting our Patreon site at www.patreon.com/Melissa Del Toro voiceover. If you'd like to read more of the stories in the Untold Tales series, not narrated here on our podcast, you can find Jeff's books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. The links for all of this information are conveniently listed in this episode's show notes. Thank you and have a wonderful day.